What is going on, everybody? I am here with my man, Adam Peri. He's a loyal, true DFSer, and we're happy to have him. Smart guy. We're going to talk over some past lineups. We're going to do basically a coaching session over here. I used to do coaching sessions when I was working at RG and then afterwards for a while. And just a reminder to anybody to sign up for the site. I mean, I'm happy to go through all of these with you. And I mean, I used to get paid about 150 an hour for these things. So it'll be well worth it to take a shot at the site. Also, we have the 1 month free and then 35 a month after that going right now. So take advantage of that on True DFS. But Adam, welcome and happy to have you on, man. How's your day going?
Thanks. It's going good. A little hectic, but haven't really looked at anything yet. But
yeah. Well, immediately
this will be the start of that.
Yeah, we're going to go back a couple weeks here, and we just wanted to talk through some of Adam's past good and bad lineups that he's had in there. So he took 3 days in a row that we're going to go through, and then we're going to break down today's slate, just sort of with the way that I would talk about building, and maybe we'll poke some holes in maybe some of the things he did, and then we'll maybe also compliment him on some things he did. Adam, so right off the bat in this particular lineup, so you're going 5-man stacks, which again, I'm totally fine with. I go 5-man stacks, I'd say 30-ish% of the time, but I tend to, in my bigger buy-in where I'm only playing one entry, do a lot of 4-2-2s, a lot of 4-3-1s, just because I feel like I can get different from the masses who are, the 35 Osimo lineups, the 35 lineups from, the 9 guys who I'm competing against, along with the obvious everyman in the field. And one thing I love what you did in this, I mean, I love super low owned anything. So I love that you have literally only one player that I see here in double digits ownership wise, which is great. The thing is, like on this particular lineup, so the things I do like, and I'm guessing like profile 3,100 that night.
Yeah, he's 31.
Yeah, so I really like the whole overall build. I love that you use Tyon at low ownership and Ohtani. You could actually probably get away with playing a little more chalk in these situations than you decided to go for. And it looks like you went for, it was a straight up 5-3, right? It was a 3-man KC and 5-man San Diego. Now, yep. I'm all for that. And I also don't believe that you have to stack necessarily in order. However, I do think it's a little bit better if you can to try and leave one gap between your lowest guy and your higher guy, unless he's got a lot of power. That would be my only little criticism here about the Profar thing. Now, I know that it was somewhat price enforced in order to fit the stack in, so I'm okay with it. But a guy without a ton of power to use your first base spot on would be the only thing that I could see that I would maybe poke a little bit of a hole in it. Because otherwise, I actually really like the way this lineup is constructed, and I think it makes a lot of sense. I like the 5-3. I liked it, and then you use Taylor at the bottom, and maybe when you're going to do a 5-man and a 3-man. Using a bottom of the order cheap guy like Michael Taylor, who actually was great, hit a home run that night. I'm not saying it's wrong to use him. I'm just throwing out different ways that I tend to try to build. Maybe there's a way you could have tried to do something different with the Profar Taylor position, although it would have been tough. I didn't realize Taylor was minimum that night. I thought he was like probably closer to 3. But this certainly makes a lot of sense. And why don't you just go through your thought process in this lineup and let us know what you were, sort of what your thoughts were when you made this. This was I'm guessing a full slate. I'm not 100% sure, but I think it was.
I have that up here. So I mean, part of it, the 5-man decision is a huge slate. Mm-hmm. The likelihood you need an outlier performance is going to be really high, which makes the 5-man a lot more appealing. And the other thing was that, so I kind of have this question, and I don't know the answer. There might be, maybe somebody has kind of researched this. But
fire them all away.
On a huge slate like this, you don't just need an outlier. Like you need probably a huge outlier, especially if you're going to 5-man stack. And the question is like, okay, so if you look at the over-unders on the run totals, you say, well, okay, this team is, half the time they go over 6, half the time they don't. But then when you start getting into 10 runs, 15 runs, these sort of things that you might need in a slate like this, is any team more likely than another? Mm-hmm. I don't know the answer to that.
I believe that there are some. I think that what you're looking for is you want, first of all, you always want to attack the starting pitcher. But one thing that I feel like people fail to do is they do so much studying, especially on full slates, of if you're going to play a 15, like you said, a 15-game slate or a 14-game slate or whatever, anything over 11 or 10, and you're going to have teams that, are likely going to score 10 plus runs. You do want to try to find the teams that have the weaker bullpens that you feel like you can attack as well. And that's something that people don't talk about a lot. Actually, Washington would fit that category, and in a sense, you took San Diego as having a really shaky bullpen, you know. But if you need no further proof, the fact that San Diego just scored 24 runs on them the other night, when they were playing in Washington. But in order to get the 5-man, like the thing is, you don't need to get everything right. You know, you can have a 0 in baseball. You can take a 3 in baseball. Why I sometimes like doing the 4-man, and I tend to do it more on smaller slates than I do on larger slates, is to get different from those top players, and to you're going to have a differentiating lineup no matter what. But also, if you have another stack you like, or 2 other spots where you really like 2 guys, you can go 4-2-2 or something like that. And you're looking for power upside. My only issue with sometimes playing 5 guys, how often are you going to see all 5 guys hit home runs? Now, there are going to be plenty of other ways they can get there with doubles and all that stuff. But if you're playing on a full slate, it's not just the double digit runs that you need, which you should be attacking the starting pitcher and the bullpen if you're going to do so. And it's the type of power. So you look at teams' overall percentage of home runs. For example, the Blue Jays, 46% of their runs are scored on home runs. So when they score 10 runs, it's a lot more valuable than when most teams score 10 runs. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I'm just thinking about, like, some of the other stuff we've talked about, where you talk about in the videos, and we've kind of chatted in there. This is a great spot, like you said about profile. You could just use Bichette instead of Tatis, and then get power out of the first baseman, whether it's a one-off or switch around the stack a little bit, and then you're not playing. And that's just, it seems like a great way to do it. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't, but here, you see Tatis with 8 points. That could be a huge difference.
Right.
You see,
Right, and I often like to do that. It's always hard to want to leave. Like, if I'm going to make a 5-man stack of San Diego, Tatis is going to be in it almost all the time. If I'm going to make a 4-man stack, I'm very happy to take the shortstop, take Bichette, or take Xander Bogaerts or whatever, to try and get a little different, because the other people who are going to have those San Diego stacks are always going to have Tatis. In this case, I don't think you did anything wrong or anything to worry about, because it was such a low-owned San Diego stack that it doesn't matter. Like, your stack is so low-owned as a group, as a 5-man stack. I mean, for the amount of people who had this are less than 0.25% of the field that had this exact 5-man stack. I promise you that. And then combined with KC, you probably had nobody else who you had the exact same lineup as. So I'm okay with it in this kind of case, because I actually think this is a good example of a well-built lineup. I don't remember who they were facing that night for the Nationals, but I do like the way it's constructed. I just think it's important to think about little ways you can get different than what everybody else is trying to do. But you did that already with your pitching and with your stack. Your stacks, everybody being less than 10% owned except for one player. Actually everybody other than Ohtani, and it was 14%. This is that's what you want to do. So if you're going to play the 5-man, I would suggest trying to do it with the really lower owned offenses, or trying to get, like, we'll talk about it later, but when you get to the Braves tonight are going to be popular. But if you include Heredia in your lineup, using up one of those outfield spots, that immediately is going to differentiate you a little bit. If you use Kevin Smith as a catcher, already you're a little bit, now you have 2 guys less than 5% to go with the chalky guys that you want, whichever ones they may be. So I actually think the construction of this is pretty good, and it makes a lot of sense. It's absolutely the kind of thing I wouldn't mind doing either. I also don't mind if people all want to play 5-2-1s or 5-3s. That's fine. Everything like that is totally fine. I will often go 5-1-1-1 if I like 3 power spots enough. A good example, I've been doing that with a lot lately with guys like Soto. I'll use Muncy from the Dodgers at times in that situation. Obviously, you can use any power bat really, but if you're going to be doing the one-off thing, you want to make sure they're power bats. And the mini stack you have from KC, I like quite a bit, because you get the stolen base slash medium power upside for cheap in Benintendi. You get Michael Taylor, who actually has the same kind of situation, but he's at the bottom of the order, but he fits that role. And obviously we know Salvador Perez has immense power. So I actually think this is a really well-constructed lineup, and it just didn't quite get there for you. It still made you money, but it's not just because it doesn't win the whole thing doesn't mean it's not a well-constructed lineup. You want to focus on process, not on the results, right? And I'm still shocked to see that Taillon was that low-owned, 5% against Seattle, which is pretty crazy. Obviously had an outstanding performance, but the other thing is, like, in order to do that, I think one thing that you should be doing is our site has all kinds of information. There's certain things you don't need to recreate the wheel and put everybody's ISO up again when everybody, can look it up on Fangraphs. I suggest that everybody out there uses Fangraphs as a tool. And what you're looking for is ISO, which is the isolated power index. Basically, you're not playing guys who are going to hit 3 singles. You're not playing Brock Holt in tournament lineups unless you're doing a 5-man stack and you really expect the team to go off and score near 10 runs. You're only playing guys in those 1-off, 2-off, or even 3-man things that have enough power to get you there. And this does fit that criteria, with the potential exception of maybe finding something you could do different with Profar, and maybe making it it'd be hard to make it a 5-man stack another way. I guess maybe using like Myers in the outfield and then using a really cheap. I think there's been always every day a couple cheap guys at first base that no one's playing with power. Like Bobby Dahlbeck's a guy I'll occasionally use as a 1-off, or Michael Chavis, even though they're batting at the bottom of the order. If you have a team that's going to score that many runs and they have that much power and they have this platoon advantage and all that stuff, I will occasionally take that shot. So a guy like that might be a better profile than Profire. But again, I can't really complain too much about this lineup because this actually makes a lot of sense. And I love that you went way against the grain, which is what you really want to do, especially in these large field GPPs. This was, what size tournament was this?
This was the $88, so it's 774 entries.
That's really getting way off the board. And I actually think it's the right way to go. Why don't you bring up another one that may have failed you?
This I think is, let's see. I think this is didn't cash, yeah.
Yeah.
So this is also the 88 a couple days later.
Yeah.
It's about, a little bit smaller, same buy-in, probably similar field. Yeah.
And so you have your stack here as a, what is it? I'm trying to see the bottom of it.
This is I think it's a 5 Milwaukee. Or is it a 4?
No, it's a 5.
3?
You're right. It's a 5.
Yeah.
It's a 5. It's a 5. What 5, 2, 1?
2, 3, 4.
Yeah. Again, I can't fault you a ton for construction here because I kind of agree with this. The only problem is if you're
one second. It's a 4-2-2.
Oh, it's a 4-2-2. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I saw 1, 2. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I saw Winker as a Milwaukee. So 4-2.
Yeah.
So I can't. So okay, then that takes away what I was going to say, because I was going to say if I'm going to make a 5-man stack with Milwaukee, I would include Yelich. It's really hard for me when I make the 5-man stacks not to include the best hitter who's probably going to get you points some way or another. But if you're going to do a 4-man, I don't think that same rule applies, especially if the team has a lot of power, which Milwaukee doesn't really. But if I was going to play 5,300 for Adames, I probably would be trying to find a way to pay up for Yelich, just because you're spending so much on your shortstop here, and there's so many good shortstops as we know, that I would probably try to sync the Adames, Yelich, and that they're really going to go off together. That's just my first, inclination right there. Other than that, I actually don't mind the way the 4-2-2 is done. I probably would have done something different with the Michael Taylor thing again. There had to be other minimum cost or near minimum cost guys out there, but you do have some correlation between he and O'Hearn batting 5th and 8th. They're close enough in the lineup where I could kind of see it. It's just you're asking for a lot to have a 1-off or a 2-off for a guy like Michael Taylor. I used, Bobby Dahlbeck, who, even though the numbers may not show it right now, has immense power, and you're playing for that home run upside. Now, Taylor's got enough power to where I don't mind him in 3- and 4-man stacks, but not a guy I would be looking to use in 1 or 2 offs. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. It's I'm trying to think what my rationale was, but I agree. And that, maybe there's also just a bit of a kind of recency bias. He had been doing well. I had had success with him, as we just saw, and maybe that just sort of clouded my judgment. But it makes sense, yeah.
It's not a major flaw. It's just something that I'm looking for. It's the Luis Arias is a great example of this for Minnesota. Like, yeah, sure, in cash games you can play him on his own, but never should you be playing a guy like Luis Arias as a 1-off. I'm sure I've done it almost by accident if I had a ton of lineups. But there are guys who just, this guy's played 90 games and has hit 1 home run. And people tend to do that all the time. They'll play I can always use the cheap Arias at 3,300 or whatever. And I just would never go that route. I'd be looking for power and trying to reconstruct my lineup in order to find a way to get him in there. And again, the thing with the Milwaukee that I'm just pointing out that, again, with just in terms of Yelich, these Milwaukee guys were really expensive that day, like really, really unusually, which is why they're so low owned. that I think I would, for my comfortability, I would have to have their best hitter in there if I'm going to pay that much for the stack. Because it's not just about how many players you stack, it's the percentage of allocated cost of your overall lineup. And in this case, they take up their 4 players, including your pitchers. I believe they take up nearly half your about 40% of your overall salary. So if I was going to do that, I would definitely be including a guy like Yelich, even though he hasn't been the same this year. But that's really my only critique there. Why don't you let me know if you have any questions or thoughts or anything that you think about? Like, and there's nothing you can do about the Scherzer thing. Like, I mean, look, it's going to happen sometimes. I played Scherzer, I'm sure, too, that night. There wasn't a whole lot of options, and I like the Skubal play because I think that, no one wants, even though it didn't quite work out, people are terrified of lefties against Minnesota for somewhat good reason. But at this point, Minnesota, I think, was missing Donaldson at least, and potentially somebody else a couple weeks ago. So I actually don't have a major issue with that. I'm just trying to think, you should always be thinking of constructing and trying to get those double-digit points from all of your players if you can, but mostly you want to be relying on speed and power combinations. And that's where I was saying, if you feel like you're looking at a 2-man stack or a 1-off, that I would be looking at those guys ISO, and I'd be looking at the stolen base numbers of the pitchers they're facing, and I would be looking at their own stolen base attempt numbers. And I'm different than everybody. I don't care about how many successfully you steal. I want to know how many you attempt. I want the guys like Jose Ramirez, the old Jose Ramirez, who just ran every time he was on base a couple of years back with the Indians. It was like, it feels good every time the guy gets on base that he's going to give you a shot. It's not like we're getting penalized if he gets thrown out. Does that all make sense?
Yeah, no, it totally does. And it's, there's a lot of, you think of what baseball used to be, way more stolen bases, right? So like these guys are capable of doing it. It's a risk reward thing on their part, right? So if you get the pitchers who they could do it on, the manager or the players or whoever is making that kind of calculus. And so there's a lot of guys, they attempt them for those reasons, I think, like you're saying.
You'll notice teams that don't even run that much will all of a sudden run like 5 times in a game because they have the right kind of a matchup, whether it be the pitcher or the catcher, who just aren't good at holding runners on. Robbie Ray.
Yeah, actually, maybe this is a question. I mean, this is another. I think the answer might be yes, but I don't know if it's small. But thinking if you have a game stack, you're probably betting it's a close game. And so steals might be more likely. I mean, now we're getting into this really granular stuff, but you're not going to steal in a blowout.
Yes, if you're playing both sides of the game, stolen bases are then much more valuable, 100%.
Right.
But and people say they don't believe in game stacks, but between hitting conditions, hitters, umpires versus pitchers, umpires, and really bad, bullpens on both sides, there's plenty of reasons to game stack in baseball, even though game stacking is technically not a real thing. There's no reason one team scoring 12 runs means the other team should score 9. But if you have great hitting conditions and an excellent hitter's umpire, that's going to, and 2 pitchers who have trouble, finding the zone, that makes sense to go after that. And I like targeting also, like the Cincinnati-Milwaukee games tend to go off like that because historically Milwaukee's had a good bullpen for the last few years. Back when I first started playing DFS, they were like the bullpen and starting staff you wanted to pick on. Cincinnati's got a shaky bullpen that gives up power. So I completely understand the game stack here. I just, the only issue I would have is probably the O'Hearn-Taylor I don't mind O'Hearn as a one-off even because he's the perfect kind of guy at a cheap price who has got the power. I just probably would be trying to find some other way to rework the Taylor thing. And also I would try to get Yelich into the lineup and maybe play a 5-2-1 or 5-5 whatever 1-1-1 or 5-3 with Yelich instead of Winker in that particular situation. Does that make sense?
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah, all right. So let's jump over to one more and then we'll start talking about tonight.
Yeah, so do we want to do
as we go?
Yeah, so do we want to do one more past lineup?
Yeah, so only if you got one called up. If not,
yeah, well, sandwiched in between was a kind of a late night sweat, the Washington game that went off. It was just a fun one, and it was right in between those. That's why I pulled up these 3.
You mind scrolling down a little bit? I can't see the bottom of the screen.
And this is actually one where some of these were like the Harrison Gomes thing. It was like, it doesn't fit at all what we're talking about, but
Harrison is a little bit of a tough one because I'm going out of my way to continually keep stopping playing this guy, but that's because he's going to be chalky. So he's the only. Oh no, you know you had other Washington players here.
Yeah. So what happened here with him is the guy who I thought was going to be chalkier was Escobar leading off.
Right.
And I said, I'm just gonna, I was hand building this.
Yeah.
And I could have went with him cheaper. I said, well, everyone who's doing that's gonna throw him in. He's the better play. So I'm gonna throw in Harrison. And I think, I mean, in this 15-run game, Harrison did really well. And I think Escobar still outscored him.
I mean, in general, I think Josh Harrison is he's batting further down the lineup. If you're making a
right.
Case, Escobar always makes more sense, but I have no problem with the playing Harrison over him. Harrison is a guy who can occasionally steal a base, although it doesn't as much as he used to. And he, when he's up 5-6 or whatever in the order, only a couple spots or one spot behind Soto at times, I tend to like him more because Soto will get walked. So he'll at least have the opportunity to drive in runs without hitting one out because he doesn't have a ton of power. But if you're going to play a little, so you have I'm looking at, it's a 4-3-1. Is that right?
Yep.
4-3-1. And first of all, I love the one-off. If you're going to play the one-offs, I love doing it at short because like we've talked about before, short or the outfield, you have so much upside on basically that position on both positions. But at shortstop, there's a different guy every night. So Bichette immediately would get you different, and you didn't really need to get as much different because you were off the board with the Dodgers stack, which I actually really like. It didn't work out entirely, but it doesn't mean that it wasn't the right play. Bellinger let you down, you know what I mean? Muncy let you down, but overall, the thinking behind this could have been a really, really big lineup. You got a little bit unlucky with. I think Brett Anderson got hurt that game because he only pitched 4 innings.
He did, yeah. It was frustrating, and so that was early in the night, and I thought, okay, I'm done. And then Washington goes off, and I'm like, oh, Brett Anderson he was rolling.
Yeah.
And, he pitches one more inning and gets a win at least.
Yeah.
That alone would have put me probably top 7 or 6 in this. So.
Yeah, and then there's room for improvement on that, and there was for Corbin as well. I really like this lineup, and I like that you're going way off the board in general. I don't have a problem with Harrison as part of a 3-man. So once you get the third in, like Harrison, I guess you could say is at batting 7th is similar to Michael Taylor batting 7th. The difference is using a second base slot versus using an outfield spot. An outfield spot is so much more valuable than a second base spot. Today actually is oddly a little bit different. There's a lot of good second base options today, which is unusual. Second base has been one of the worst positions this year. So using a cheap spot over there for Harrison is probably a better move than using Michael Taylor in the outfield. Not to say that that's the same lineup, but you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I think it makes.
It's
go ahead.
No, I think it's like you're saying in the thing is though it is a 4-man. I mean, I don't know what like the power of Gomes is a catcher, so maybe it's not a big deal, but in hindsight, I don't know. Like if he had a bad game, I'd say, yeah, I don't know what his ISO really is, and if that was really
Gomes is fine, especially at catcher like 2,500, and he is a decent enough hitter that where it makes sense as a part of I wouldn't ideally try to target your Gomes and Harrison as a part of a 3-man stack, but if you're using Soto, if you love Soto anyway, which obviously he had a monster night, I don't really mind it. It's just there's not as much correlation as you might think with those guys, even though they all played well and Washington went off. It's probably not the ideal 3-man, but I prefer Harrison at second base at 2,400 than I do Taylor at minimum cost in the outfield as a part of a 3-man. I think that's the real point that I'm trying to make, that I think that's your play here is better. And it's partly because of position scarcity and cheap guys. And you had Escobar probably was minimum cost at this time, who people would go to before they would go to Harrison. So I certainly understand why you would play Harrison on that, although you don't need to get as different once your lineup is already so contrarian. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally.
You could have used Escobar and got a little more correlation with Soto because he's leading off. Maybe he drives him in. More important probably on FanDuel, but still a value on DraftKings as well.
Yeah, I mean this was like overthinking it probably, and I was like, well, everyone's going to go to Escobar. Escobar's the better play. I'm going to go to the work,
I actually
And
don't. I think. I mean, just straight up, if you ask me who's a better hitter, I think Harrison is actually a better hitter. Escobar's
Escobar's I mean, you look at his
look at his
career. Yeah,
Yeah,
I remember him on Kansas City. It's like,
yeah. I mean, yeah, the guy
so,
was the number 9 hitter that hit like 2 home runs a year, basically every year, and he was a good enough defensive player that he never.
yeah. I mean, your best bet was a stolen base. So like that was there was some long term kind of. I say still a guy leading off in the stack, but yeah, maybe.
I actually think that it's. I actually don't think it's too bad. I just in general wouldn't want to go 3, 6, 7 unless I like the power upside. But in this particular case, because of the cheap prices on Harrison and Gomes, I'm totally fine with it. The cheap prices at the positions. That's the important thing. Catcher, second base are positions where we can spend down and do that. I don't think we should be trying to do that in the outfield for guys at the bottom of the order.
Yeah. So let me ask a question about stack spacing. I mean, it seems to me like in a 4-man or the smaller the stack, 3-man or 4-man, the less spacing you probably could have. Whereas if you have a 5-man, you're betting on that game going off.
Right.
And then you could probably think about it a lot less.
Right. So if you loved Washington in general, you probably would want to try and get some of the higher end bats in there, which really there aren't. The problem with Washington is there really aren't that many. You've got Bell. You already have Muncy at first base, so you can't do that. Or you could put Muncy at second, I guess, but you'd have to rework everything. You've got Bell, Soto, and Turner, who are really your power upside guys. Well, since with Schwarber out of the lineup, so I actually like. I think for this particular tournament, I have no issue with the way this is built, and I actually like the more I think about it, it really leads to a good point, which is getting Gomes and Harrison at 4,900 combined is very different than getting O'Hearn at first base and Taylor in the outfield at 4,900 combined. Those positions are just much more, you want to go more power heavy. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure.
You know every player's ISO. You just need to know whether they're good enough to, solid enough. If they're 200 plus, that would be awesome. If they're 300 plus, it's amazing versus the handedness of the pitcher. But I think this makes enough sense to me totally. I actually think this is a really, really nice lineup that you got a little bit unlucky with actually, and you could have taken a big one down.
It's always, I mean, you need luck to just take it on any.
You do.
And this is the size of this field is.
Yeah, it's 1,291 people.
Yeah, so you need a lot of luck. But one shout out I would give is like this is about 2 weeks ago.
Mm-hmm.
And you and I think there's some other people in the true DFS community were bullish on Soto, and it made sense. And the market was like nobody was playing Soto at that time,
right?
And so that was a big. If I'm trying to think back to this, maybe I should have used one more recently, but
no,
I'm trying to think back to this, and I'm pretty sure that was the reason I really wanted to get this in, or was trying to get this in at that time over these few days. So just a shout out to the kind of the touting of that.
Appreciate that. Yeah, there's guys you can catch it who are on something. You know, when Soto says I'm going up against you put the lefty on it. That's all the information you need to know about a guy like Soto. He has a lefty out and pitched to him and during the home run derby.
He's 8% owned here. I mean that's
right.
Would never happen now, and so
no, especially at 4,500 and Soto.
4,500. Yeah.
For anybody who doesn't know this, like this is where paying attention to the little things you hear in baseball that are important. Soto talking about fixing his swing. The guy was an all-star, hit almost 300 the first half of the season, but was pissed off at himself because he leads the league in ground balls. And he hits the ball really hard, but he hits it on the ground too much. So he thought that the home run derby would help fix his swing. And so far he's proven to be pretty accurate with that because I think he's hit like 5 or 6 since the break. So I actually really like what you did here. So I have no issues with that. With that said, feel free to ask any questions as we go, but let's start on, let's build one from scratch, leaving a couple spaces empty so DraftKings doesn't get mad at us again.
Sure.
So I talked a little bit about who I like, but who sort of caught your attention today when you were looking? And today is a day where I think pitching. So lately I've been building my stacks because we've had so many shaky pitching slates. I've been building my stacks before my pitchers. That's a big question I always got from people I'd coached in the past. Which one would you do first? And it really is slate dependent. Now, tonight's slate, I think that we'll find enough value to be able to play guys like Buehler, Minaya, but I don't necessarily think that their ceiling is so much higher than Blake Snell and Charlie Morton. And then if you did want to pay up for a ton of bats, you could do like what I did last night in the lineup that I thought was going to win me all the money, but it ended up sort of fizzling out because I got nothing from my Dodgers, unfortunately, but I had the Boston stack with the Dodgers, and then I had Manning as my pitcher Manning and I can't remember who my other pitcher was, but Manning who put up like 20, he was awesome, for 41.
Yeah.
And how I don't love tonight, like against the Yankees, but I'm open to it. So it does depend on what kind of lineups you want to build. For the most part on DraftKings, what I'm doing is trying to, as I am mostly spending up a pitcher between Manaea, Buehler, and Morton. Those are my three favorites. So I don't know what do you prefer today in terms of pitching?
So a lot of this is going to depend on ownership. I mean, $1 million question, I guess. But
so in general, my thoughts with pitching are that I'm happy. I think it's awesome when you can get a low-owned guy who has some upside. I would tend to want that guy to either have the massive upside of a really high-end guy who people don't want to pay all the way up for, sort of similar to the Houston pitcher from Garcia a couple nights ago. People didn't want to spend up for him. They got onto him more when the game in San Diego with the Padres game was a little bit shaky with the weather. But Garcia would be a great example of a guy who nobody wanted to pay 10-4 for him. So I was like, okay, well, I'm happy to play him. I think he has the same upside as these other guys beneath him. And if I can win on pitching with that, I can find enough value out there to get there. So I don't worry personally as much about ownership with pitching, except for unless I want to stack a chalky team.
What I meant was the stack ownership. So like I'm thinking SP2, if there's going to be high ownership on the Twins, I might take a stab at Haney. I mean, his upside is huge. And it's going to depend. It's going to depend on how many lineups I play. But if I'm playing a lot of Haney, I'm going to get some Minnesota stacks for sure. But then I'm trying to figure out the Patino thing, which I think I'm off of. I've heard, I didn't really look at stuff, but I listened to a few things and people are kind of touting him. It's not like he's not 4,000, know, he's 6,500, seems a little off. So I don't know. I think Manaea jumps out, but he's jumping out to everyone. But maybe you're right. Maybe I shouldn't worry about ownership that much.
I hear you though. Like, I mean, I think there are times where you do want to get different, with your pitcher, but I do think that Patino has good stuff. He's been he hasn't really put up a game that we would be happy with this year, really. But it doesn't mean that he's not strong enough. He got called up from AAA, and he's stretched out. Cleveland's offense has been shaky at best. So I don't mind yet. Go ahead.
Well, so maybe to be more clear, maybe this is confirmation bias because I've only listened to a couple people, but if that many people are on Patino, right? So 2 for 2, then I don't want him. Right. So if his ownership
that many people are going to end up on him though.
Yeah, so we'll see. Otherwise, I mean, Buehler stands out, but like San Francisco's pretty good, so I'm a little kind of concerned about that. Otherwise, it's like there's a lot of similarities. The Maeda thing, like you were saying, is scary because of the pitch count.
Right.
Otherwise, he's totally in play. Snell's got an upside. Even Elzolai's not bad if no one's going to play him.
There's one other guy you haven't mentioned who I'm going to throw out there just because he's been much better than everybody thinks he is, and that's Chris Flexen.
Yeah.
And I am in a couple lineups right now, but what I'm doing is where I am going to play a little bit more of a chalkier stack, that's where I'll use my Flexen. Where I'm going to play, I look, Blake Snell has been so shaky. I don't know that we should even say he's a better play than Flexen. It is a great matchup. We know he's got the stuff in general. He just hasn't really found himself. Maybe this is a great get right spot for him. But I feel like a lot of that's going to come down to the pitcher's umpire, which we don't, to the umpire for me, because he struggles so much in 8, 9, 10 pitch at bats, that's why he only lasts 4 or 5 innings so often. So it's really a matter of preference. Like what I've got right now, just to give it away, I've got 40% Buehler on DraftKings. I've got 30% Morton, 50%. I've got 50% Snell, but I'm going to mix that in with some Flexen. And then I've got 30% Manaea, but I'm using Manaea like 75% on FanDuel. So sort of hedging against myself a little bit there. Buehler and Manaea, I think, are the best two and safest options on the slate, but I have them together a number of places, but I don't think you need to go with that type of build. So let's talk about some stacks then and talk about who we like. Who
Yeah,
sort of,
I would
from
just
what you
say
look?
too, Mania seems like a much more solid play on FanDuel.
Mhm,
We need that quality start,
mhm.
you know. Um, and maybe you're right too. Like maybe the question of do you start with stacks or do you start with pitchers depends on the slate. Right here, it's so hard to decide between
This
all
is
these
in
pitchers. I
between.
don't know what you know.
Yeah. The
Well,
only thing that's different about tonight's slate is that you, especially like on FanDuel, the one thing I do really like Mania on FanDuel, but the one counter I have against him is that Walker Buehler basically throws a quality start every time he goes out there. Like,
right.
so you're getting those extra bonus points, not to mention that his team should get the win tonight, which on FanDuel obviously is huge. But Walker Buehler has pitched less than 6 innings one time in his last, I think, 15 starts. And I think all but one were quality starts.
Yeah, so
Yes.
maybe this is another one dictated by ownership. It's stuff. I mean, maybe that's a question.
Mhm.
A kind of coaching question is just to not to belabor it, but on the question of starting with stacks or pitchers when there's a there's a little bit up top with Manaea and Bueller, but
Mhm.
there's overall parity, I think, in the pitchers, and maybe that's
I think that there is parity, but I would say that there's less so tonight. Now, there's always, you could all like, we just saw a lineup with Max Scherzer where he had 3 fantasy points. It doesn't mean that he wasn't the safest pitcher that night. The safest
right.
pitcher is going to get lit up sometimes too, even against the worst teams. But yeah, you're right. There is some discrepancy. The question is, what are those extra savings giving you? So if you're going to go down to these other guys, the truth is Morton. I mean, all these guys have the potential to be in the same range as Manaea and Bueller. But Bueller, like for example, like last night with McCullers, when he got into trouble in the 6th, they are quick to bring the hook in Houston. That does not happen with Bueller in LA. You know what I mean? They let him
Yeah,
get out of it.
that's a
So
good point, and maybe there's kind of like just to do a little like meta analysis of my own thinking is maybe I'm a little bit biased by the McCullers thing and him being kind of the one guy up top
mhm,
that was obvious and kind of getting burned, and maybe the whole field will be. So
right.
maybe that's a good reason to go to Bueller,
Mhm.
um, pending the ownership. Yeah,
Yeah,
I like that.
he'll have some ownership, but let's it depends on what your stacks you're going to want. So let's talk about some stacks tonight, because I do think that you're going to get some. And I'm going to update my projections right now. The projections are always all over the place until later in the day, but I'm going to take a quick look and see where I've got some of these stacks at. If I'm going to play a really like low owned stack, I would want the safety of the best pitchers because I'm already getting so different with my stack. But I would want them to genuinely be the best pitchers that I feel are out there. So tonight, I'm just looking at my pitching ownership. I do think Bueller gets a little less ownership than Manaea, and I think Bueller is probably the better play on DraftKings personally. Or sorry, on he's probably the better, safer play. But on FanDuel, I actually, until we get the actual lineups out, because Wednesdays and Thursdays, you tend to get a lot of substitutions. So there's going to be some minimum cost or near minimum cost guys probably batting earlier in the lineups than they usually do, which will give you some chance at some value, or you can use where you can pay all the way up. I found the $1,400 difference on FanDuel mattered to me. I don't find it mattering to me as much on DraftKings between the two. So I'm happy to go with Bueller, especially at lower ownership, who I think is actually safer. Maybe, they both have immense upside, but I would say maybe was not as much upside, but it's only because Manaea threw a complete game shutout against these guys.
Call me crazy, but you could even throw in like a Haniger if you go with Bueller. You could throw in like a Haniger
100%.
Ty France type thing. Yeah.
100%. You could play a 1-off or a 2-off from that game. That's one thing I'd love to do, especially against pitchers that are and Manaea is a good pitcher, but he does have like higher variance than most of the other guys we're spending this price for usually. So
Let's see, like
I think he's a guarantee by
you can
any.
get like Torrens, or if you need a catcher spot, there might be value. But yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So on stacks, it looks like if you just look at like Sheets's raw points and ownership, it's pretty even.
Mhm.
So
Very cool.
there's been some like ambivalence on the weather in Minnesota. It's hot, but winds blowing in. As long as it checks out, I'm pretty into Minnesota, especially because you could play some Haney lineups and kind of hedge it.
Mm-hmm.
And following your strategy, guys like Larnach, even Kepler,
Mm-hmm.
they're going to go untouched in there,
Mm-hmm.
and be pretty low ownership because of the lefty thing.
Yep.
And you're betting on a big game, right? Like you're betting on them getting Haney out of there.
Right.
So the lefty thing shouldn't be a big deal if you're stacking them.
Right.
So I think that's a pretty good way to get different. I'm also like, Polanco went nuts last night. I think that's a good reason you can get off of him.
Mhm.
There's a lot of good second basemen.
Although I'm not 100% sure Polanco's going to be that. I actually don't think he'll be quite as high owned.
His price is high. Yeah.
Yeah.
His price is high, but then like, I don't know if you're stacking them and you look at, there might be people playing them because of last night. And that's kind of the thing. Like if a guy goes, if a team goes off, I'm not gonna give my money, as she said yesterday. And I think it's a good point. Well, maybe Polanco going off is like, you could just leave him out of the stack.
Yeah, he has been red hot. And the thing that's going to happen though tonight, in my opinion, is you get him probably around 10% on DraftKings, and you're probably going to see him significantly higher owned on FanDuel, where he's 2,800. And I'm actually playing him on FanDuel, but I'm playing my Minnesota guys with my Dodger stacks, for example, who people aren't going to be targeting. That's the way that I'm trying to combo stack tonight. So if you're going to go tonight for like a Minnesota stack, if you get Larnach in there, you're already getting different with that one spot for sure.
Right.
But you could actually get away. Unfortunately, there's no Kirilloff right now. But I was going to say you could play like a Kirilloff Kepler usually in the lefty if you're gonna if he was playing tonight. And the other one who's going to go low on and is not as good against lefties as he is against righties, oddly enough, for power is
no.
I don't think people are going to play Miguel Sano.
Yeah.
So if you play like a Larnach, Sano, and then build the rest of your stack out with the guys you want, Donaldson, Cruz, Garver, if you want to go that route, that's the way I would try to do it. Just so I got a little bit different by playing the lefty and then by playing Sano, who I don't think as many people will go to. And then you'd have to find some extreme value to fill your other spots.
Yeah. So let's
go ahead.
Let's plug that in for now.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, that's good. And for what it's worth, I'm a little bit lower on Minnesota, partially because of the immense ownership, but I do find myself using them as so when a team's going to be really high owned like that, I'll use them as my like the Blue Jays we've used a few times recently like this. Boston at times when they've been popular, I'll turn that into a 3-man stack and use my main stack as a different stack. Hopefully you get the best part of it and try and make it the 3 guys you want. It's okay to play some chalk. You just want to make sure that you have enough differentiators in the rest of your lineup.
Yeah, I think the thing about this Minnesota stack is like, other than maybe Andrelton, Simmons, they're all viable. So like, even if there's a chalky stack, there's so many ways to combine it that
you just jinxed it. Now Simmons is going to hit a home run tonight.
Right, I know. Maybe I should play him.
No, I know. I'm just
kidding.
Let's see. So like were you there when I was talking to Sheets on the one strikeout, the 1 inning guy? Jay Jackson.
Oh yeah. That's I put it in the Discord.
How
I saw
hilarious was that? I was like,
unbelievable.
I was like, what's he gonna do? Come in and strike? He has to strike out 3 guys and give up nothing and pitch 1 inning exactly, which we don't even know if he's gonna pitch. And then it's exactly what happens. I thought that was hilarious.
Yeah, I mean, unless you're like, if you're betting on a reliever in showdown, I guess.
Yeah.
That you can't ask for more. It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
But yeah. I saw that, and so maybe Simmons is.
It's hard to get a guy like Simmons in just with the lack of power for me, but I get it. Like I've had.
If it's a 5-man, it's maybe a little more.
Oh, if it's 5, then it's much better than the other.
Yeah.
One, sure.
The thing is, shortstop, you're giving up. Well, we don't have a lot of money anyway, so.
It's not as bad tonight because there's only, we don't have Toronto on the slate. We don't have Boston.
Right.
We do have Boston, but and the Padres, but I'm really curious to see where people end up on the Padres. That's sort of the stack that I'm going with a little bit. I think Zach Thompson has got some really good stuff, but
yeah,
take the Padres after a couple dud outings from their explosion against anybody. I'll take them in the worst park, especially on a small slate. So I'm actually leaning more Padres tonight. I think their prices also will keep people off them. So I have the Dodgers and Padres as like my 2 favorite spend up stacks that people were going to be off of tonight.
Yeah, I like both of those, and I think. I don't know what you guys were talking about. Snell starting to thinking he'd get more ownership. I mean, and if that's the case, I think Miami's got some value for a 2-man or 3-man that just can't be ignored.
Yeah, you could play Duvall. The only problem with Snell is in general, I just don't think this is the same pitcher he's been, and it's always hard. And he always ends up owned because everybody knows his talent level. I mean, I was there at the World Series last year watching him destroy my Dodgers. And for some reason he always pitches well against the Dodgers anyway, but even when he struggled this year. So if you're going to do the Minnesota stack, so you're probably the way you're getting a little bit different is you're doing the Larnach Sano thing. Now there will be some other people with that combination. So can we find some value to make this work where you have a legitimate SP2? That's what
So my
next thing would be. Go
my
ahead.
thinking was who's the Boston guy? Hawk? Why isn't he
Yeah.
here? Here we go.
So if you play Hawk, then you're right. You're already different now.
Yeah, we're different, and we've got plenty of money.
You've got plenty of money left to spend. You could even play the chalky Albies if you wanted to, who I really like at second base. You could play Kike Hernandez, who I really like at second base at 3,800. And then what combination could you play them with? You could play a Kike. You could fix a couple of things and play the Kike. I really love JD Martinez's price tonight, and so you can get a little tiny bit of the Boston exposure. It doesn't leave you in a great spot at short, however, but it does give you, like, you know, I think that this is not going to be. It's not way off the board, but it's somewhat off the board. The problem is you just don't have a shortstop you can use.
So
You could say F it with Simmons and then, you know, change your first baseman or catcher. But there you go. So now you still got a different stack, and you play a guy like Aguilar against the Blake Snell, and boom, you've already got, you know, you want to try to have at least on slates like this, you can get away with having only 2 or 3 guys under 10%. But I mean, ideally, you'd like to have 3 or 4 guys under 10%. And I think you've got that in this lineup, especially with as your pitcher. So I think
for what it's worth, you have a tiny bit of correlation with the Boston guys and Hawk.
Right.
For what it's worth. So that too. Yeah.
Exactly. It gives you a little boost, maybe, because with a guy at 5, usually people say, oh, we don't care about the win on DraftKings. Hell yes, we do when the guy's 5,300. You know what I mean? Yeah. Those 4 points are going to make up for 20% of his. If he scores 17 points for you, you're going to be happy with that tonight.
Right. Plus, also, I mean, if he's getting the win, that means he's pitching 5 innings, which, like, you're not guaranteed with any 5,300 guy. So, yeah.
Yeah, it makes sense. So you might do me a favor. Let's do one more stack build, and maybe it'll bring up some more questions. Let's try. Who would be another stack you'd be looking at tonight in addition to Minnesota? Let's play a lineup with your starting Heaney, because you mentioned you like him, and I have some interest in Heaney as well.
So let's go Heaney. Let's just throw Buehler in to make it a little harder. I think so. I agreed that I like the Oakland thing. I don't think anyone's going to be playing them. So let's see what we could get out of them.
The only problem I have with the Oakland's just the worst hitters park on the stadium and on the thing. So I'm looking to more mini stack Oakland if I play them. It's more of Olsen, Laureano, maybe Canna. They're expensive too, but that's okay, because then you can. I mean, there are other options we can use for some value tonight. Let's just say. Go ahead.
Let me ask you a question about that stadium. Is it, there's hitters parks that are hitters parks and pitchers parks. There's pitchers parks because they suppress power, or there's, other reasons. Colorado's not just a hitters park because of power, for example. Right. So, like, if I'm playing the 5-man, I may care a little bit less about the power suppression, because if I'm playing the 3-man, I need power, right? So
that's fair. The only issue I have, and look, Oakland, I'm not going to say you can't stack Oakland tonight, because I do like them more. For me, it's more of a mini stack. Take a Matt Olson 0% owned one-off versus everybody playing Ohtani, for example. The other thing I would just say about flexing is I'm looking back through it's been a while. He had one game against the Padres in May that he got, was that right? Yeah, that he got completely lit up. And other than that, even when he struggled and hasn't struck out a lot of people, he hasn't given up power too much. He's still fairly low strikeout righty, which is why I like Olsen. Yeah. But I don't know if I could get behind the full. I mean, look at his innings: 7, 7, 6, 5, 6, 8, 6, 6, 7. It's not a guy who's been getting just beaten around all over the park. So I find, although the bullpen behind him sucks, so I find myself wanting to less go to the Oakland stack, play more maybe of an Olsen, Canna, Laureano, who all have power upside, and Laureano especially with the stolen base upside, depending on where he's at.
So let's do that. And we both, I think, kind of like the Dodgers or San Diego. Maybe San Diego would be interesting just because there's some, we looked at some San Diego lineups earlier in the video. So maybe,
yeah, let's do it.
We could illustrate some of the points we made. Who knows? The prices will be different.
But you can always use I think your San Diego lineup, it's easiest to start with the minimum cost catchers, Caratini, or whether it's Caratini or Rivas. It might be Rivas today, but they're 2,000 and 2,200.
Either way, we'll leave 200 on the table so we could.
Yeah. And then if you want to build it out, you can use the guys who I would be looking to first would, if I'm going to make a full stack, I'm going to play Tatis, and I'm probably going to play Machado, because then it also saves me my outfield spots. And I probably would be looking at only playing one outfielder. Grisham is the most popular one, but that's fine with me. I don't think this stack is going to be crazy high owned. And I think that Tommy Pham followed by Will Myers would be my next guys. Will Myers would be much less owned than any of them because his price is too high and he'll be further down in the order, and he's not quite as good a hitter, but he's close.
Yeah. The thing about Myers versus, I mean, they both can steal, I guess. I guess more of Pham's upside comes from stolen bases. We're betting on a big score, probably not a close game. So maybe we just go Myers. Maybe that's overthinking it.
No, that's fine.
The min cost. So this is a case. I don't know if Profar is going to be in the lineup. The thing about him and Min, none of these first basemen offer any kind of power anyway.
Right.
And like Profar will, and San Diego might be different enough anyway, but Profar will get you instantly different at first.
I don't know if Profar is playing.
Yeah, he might. It may be a moot point, but
I don't think that he's officially a part of the lineup right now.
Right. And then you suffer the same issue of.
He may give somebody a rest on Thursday, so we have to wait on that one. But I hear what you're saying with Profar, and I agree with you enough. If you're going to make the 5-man stack, I do think that I actually don't mind Eric Hosmer.
I was about to say, like, that's 90% of people would probably prefer Cronenworth.
I prefer Cronenworth. See, the thing is, I'm using, like, I have some Cronenworth lineups that so if I was playing Cronenworth, I would be playing, because I really like Albies and Lowe tonight. So if I'm playing Cronenworth, I actually might be playing him at first tonight, and using the other guys at second base. But I don't mind Hosmer. Just gives you a tiny bit more savings, so you can do something different. I mean, obviously this is 6 guys, so it's not going to work anyway. But if you took Will Myers out, then all of a sudden you've got money to spend on the rest of your lineup. And even though if you look at Hosmer, even just look at his game log, like, the guy, still hits doubles. He doesn't hit tons of home runs. He's got enough power to get you there. He's got less power than a guy like Rizzo, who's in a similar price range. But I don't think he's going to be especially popular either. So I actually do have Hosmer in some lineups, but I also have Hosmer in lineups where I'm playing Cronenworth as well. I'm trying to get different every little extra way I can. So some people will play that's why I said if I'm going to use Cronenworth without Hosmer, I want to use one of the good second basemen that I like, that are going to be popular. If I'm playing Cronenworth and I want to play Hosmer, that's already a way of, I think, getting his own San Diego stack. And then it frees up an extra outfield spot, which is the spot you want, because that's where most of the value and where the top hitting is going to come from.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, it's that stacking on the infield thing, and it makes
It's so, like, to me, it's so much the right strategy these days on DraftKings, especially where people are still mispriced all over the place. I mean, you could do something like you could play 2 one-offs, and I mean, obviously this is 5 guys, but like 6 guys. But if it was 5 guys, let's just say for argument's sake, and you had, I don't know, substitute anybody else in there, you could play a JD Martinez one-off at 4,500 along with the Bradley Zimmer, who's not the kind of guy I want to play minimum for. But if he's leading off again, I don't mind taking that shot in a spot where I think he's got multiple routes to get there.
And I like I mean. Maybe the Patino ownership is just something I heard, but like if he gets a good chunk of ownership, like totally fine playing 2 or 3 Cleveland guys. So let's just look at this.
Patino right now, I don't think he's gonna. I think he'll get maybe he'll get somewhere around 10%.
Yeah, maybe not. I don't know. So we can throw in Zimmer. We don't necessarily need a Cleveland guy, but if we want to go like a Rosarena.
I was just saying if you wanted to specifically play the other things. So if you San Diego stack the infield, you don't need it. I mean, there you go. I mean, actually, I have some similar builds to that.
A little Bruhan, if we need to go.
Yeah, then you can go to Revis if it's the
Revis, save us,
A lot of ways you can go around the building. I think it's just important, hopefully talking through the process is helpful. Just deleting a couple of those names just so we don't have they get mad when we have to post the full 9-man thing.
Sure.
Not entering these lineups. If you are watching from DraftKings, we're just talking through some possibilities and ways to build to try and get different on in GPPs. You don't play any cash, is that correct?
I do not, no.
Yeah, I don't either anymore. I used to, and honestly I did very well at it, but it's so not fun to me.
Well, that's what I was about to say. I mean, maybe I should be playing cash, but I'm like trying to have fun.
Well, you got a
Maybe
nice
that's a
Syrian
mistake.
ring though going. I don't know if you want to be playing cash. You're going way off the board with the lineups you showed me. So I actually like the way that you're thinking about this stuff. So
Well,
maybe you shouldn't.
that seems to be I mean, I I haven't been doing this long enough to have very strong opinions on anything, but it seems to me with the variance in baseball, I mean, this is mostly about ownership games
Yeah,
more than
yeah,
anything else.
I totally agree. Couldn't agree more.
Yeah, and so
Everybody,
that's why I mean, I'm trying to either avoid chalk or have it different in some way as much as possible.
right. And what I would say
Yeah,
is like it is an ownership thing. There are still some times where I'm willing to eat a little bit of chalk, and I'm much more willing to do that in 4 max tournaments that I'm entering all 4, like the 250. I'm much more willing to do that in the 20 max tournaments if I'm entering all 20. But more importantly than those ones, I'm really trying to do it in the single entry stuff more often. Get the guys I really want in, and then figure out a few places to get different. Because I don't think you need to worry about 1% versus 5% owned guys as much in those
right,
smaller fields where everybody's got the same amount of entries.
right.
Anyway, with all that,
Yeah.
so any other questions and stuff before we get out of here? I think this is a good first way to go. I think that there's a lot of things we could follow up on potentially if you want to, so, in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah.
But I think this
No,
is
no,
hopefully gives you like you're pretty good. You're faster than most people at picking up on the things that we talk about and from a game theory perspective. And I think that's what baseball really is. It's much more of a game theory game than it is you need the absolute best player. When you get to NBA, you're talking about something very, very different where the projections of the players' points are going to be within 25%, a huge percent of the time. In baseball, you're going to have 0 and then you're going to have 30 that's going to equal out to sometimes for a guy who averages 9. You know what I mean? It's
yeah,
the game is played.
I think that's right. And I think, again, I don't know the answer to this, but there is an answer. Maybe someone knows, but when you're on these baseball slates, like you have a 50-50 on a team's run line, but as you start, let's say it's 6, they're 50-50 to go over 6, and they're much more likely to get to 7 to 8 but as you get into 12, 13, I'm not sure it's different than any other team.
Right.
And how much different it is.
Right.
And so that's where a lot of this kind of these kind of game theory stuff comes in. And I don't know, maybe it is much different, but
yeah, and the thing is, I always try to remind everybody, it's not just how many runs you score. I've won tournaments. Part of my 4-man stacking, part of my love for it is I've won 100,000. I think 3 different times where my 4-man stack scored less than 4 runs in a game.
Yeah,
and
this is
you just happen to get the power side of it.
Yeah, I mean, this is a pretty good example. 7 runs from San Diego is pretty good, but
right.
On this slate, you've got the Yankees with 12, Baltimore's got 7,
15.
The Cubs have 25, Texas has 10, Houston has 9. So this is a great example.
Exactly. The power upside.
It's the power upside. And then the 3-man, I mean, you get 2 home runs from Benintendi and Taylor. And so, yeah.
Absolutely. It's wild what you can get with, when you try to just approach it from a trying to take the power, angle rather than team to try and score the most runs. Now, the team that scores the most runs are so often not the winning stacks that win. It's the teams that have the most home runs. You know what I mean? And sometimes the stack might, your 3-man stack might have 2 guys with 0s, but your one other guy hits 2 home runs and a double, and it actually ends up working out if they're low owned enough.
Yeah, but I guess that's why, like, thinking about the run totals also in the stadiums, a stack could seem great because they have a high run total, and it may be a hitter's park, but it's, its home run percentage versus another park might not be that much different, right? Like, totals can go high in stadiums for other reasons. So, like, yeah, there's all this stuff to think about,
yeah, it's really true. And it's just, I tell this to everybody who I've ever done coaching with, there is no such thing as having the right answer. It's having the right process. Trying to think about it the way that we're thinking about it, that it was really from a game theory perspective. How can we be differentiating? How can we try and get different? How can we play guys we want who are going to be popular with guys like the Minnesota example, with guys who aren't going to be as popular that we still like in the stacks? And also, if you're betting on the team to score enough runs, a guy in a lefty-lefty matchup might only see that guy once or twice. So you just shouldn't worry about it as much.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's the way I see it. So with that said, I want to remind everybody out there, look, anybody who's a member of True DFS, I'm happy to do these coaching sessions with you guys and go through it. And, you know, I would actually look forward to it. So remember that. And anybody else out there who wants to join us, you can do it for free for a first month, and then it'll be $35 a month after that. And I mean, look, like I said, a lot of people have reached out for coaching sessions, and I charge a lot less for the site than I am for the individual coaching sessions. So hopefully this is helpful. You're pretty sophisticated compared to a lot of people I've done the coaching with. But by the way,
But I'll just add, everyone should reach out, because I want to watch the coaching sessions, you know?
Yeah.
And that's, you know, I don't mean to interrupt, but
No,
the pitch is important, but like, I want to watch others too.
Mm-hmm.
I've been like, you know, on and off, you know, played DFS here a little bit, but over the pandemic is when I've really started getting into it. And I imagine that I'm in the same boat as a lot of people. I've never talked to anyone about any of this, right? I mean, the extent that I've talked about daily fantasy sports is like making comments in YouTube chats or Slack or Discord, right? So like, this is just a huge opportunity to have a discussion about, you know, how you go about these things that, like, you know, 95% of people don't get unless you're making videos. So
no, I
you really should take advantage of it.
I'm glad. I appreciate the kind words about that. And you know, not to toot my own horn or whatever, but I have coached 5 guys who have won the Millionaire Maker in one sport or another, who 3 of them, when I first talked to them, didn't know anything about DFS at all, had never played before. So people, you can get good at this game, even if it seems daunting and people are throwing out numbers, and you look at other sites that have 700 different types of things that you're looking at, especially for baseball, play game theory. You know what I mean? There's some very basic things. When you're trying to find one-offs or small stacks, mini stacks to go complement your stacks, try to find the power upside. Keep it simple, but play game theory and play the ownership game. And you've done a really good job of that so far. It doesn't always mean you're going to win. Baseball is one of those things. You could go through a 3-week losing streak or whatever. It doesn't mean your process is wrong. You just have to stay the course. And then when you hit, you're going to hit for a lot more, and you're going to give yourself a chance to win a tournament like you did in that 11th place lineup that you were showing me. So anyway, Adam, I got to run to get out on another call, but I really appreciate it. Great talking to you, and I appreciate how specific. What's your background in, by the way?
My background in, like, what do I'm a PhD student in sociology and in philosophy of science.
Oh, beautiful. Okay, that makes a lot of sense why you think the way that you do, which is good.
Maybe. I mean, I think I guess I think for a living, right? It's just kind of research and writing. So maybe that helps. But I've been, you know, I've been playing kind of. Have you ever read, like, there's a book about rotisserie baseball in the 80s? Like, these guys that invented it at like a rotisserie chicken.
Oh, yeah. How was that? They were actually at the chicken place. That's why it's called rotisserie.
Yeah. So my uncle picked up that book somehow with his friends in the 80s and have been playing since then. Wow. I've been playing since middle school. Since about 12 or 13, I played regular fantasy. I never got into DFS. I never played year long after college. And then, just kind of sitting around here inside for a year. So, you know, it's the perfect thing to do. Yeah. But I do have, maybe at least in baseball, a long kind of background of being into fantasy sports and stuff. So, yeah.
Well, I'm sure big things are going to come for you, man. And we're excited to have you part of the site. Good luck to everybody else out there. And
I appreciate it.
DM me with any questions or any way to set up coaching times, and we'll keep this process rolling.
Thank you.
Everybody. Thank you, Adam.